Prime Minister Mark Carney has delivered on that promised reset of Canadian-Chinese relations. He is positioning China as a major partner as Canada moves away from dependence on the United States. In Beijing this morning, the Prime Minister announced a new deal aiming to end Canada's trade war with China.
And so I'm pleased today to announce that Canada and China have reached a preliminary but landmark trade agreement to remove trade barriers and reduce tariffs.
That deal is expected to see China lower its tariffs on Canadian agricultural products, notably its punishing levy on canola seed. In return, Canada will allow Chinese electric vehicles back into the Canadian market with a cap. Ashley Burke is part of our CBC News team traveling with the Prime Minister in Beijing, and she brings us the details.
Hours after the Prime Minister met with China's president here in Beijing, Mark Carney announced a breakthrough. He says Canada reached a deal to get China to drop its retaliatory tariffs on Canadian canola meal, lobsters, crabs, and peas starting March 1st, and that China will also lower tariffs hitting Canadian canola seed to about 15%.
We're returning to the levels of Chinese automobiles as a cap that we had 2 years ago, okay? Secondly, just to reinforce, that's less than 3% of the Canadian auto sector.
Carney also said that China's president agreed to allow Canadians to travel to China without needing a visa. Now, at his press conference, Carney faced questions from journalists about his decision to reset relations. Less than a year ago, he called China the biggest security threat to Canada, but when I asked him if he still believes that, he wouldn't say. He did say that he did discuss foreign interference and human rights during talks.
We fundamentally stand up for human rights. We stand up for democracy, territorial integrity, rights to self-determination. We take the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. That means the following. We do engage with countries. We calibrate that engagement depending on our values and our interests, so that engagement is more narrow when there are those issues.
Carney also said that the way Canada's relationship is progressing with China is more predictable than with the U.S. Ashley Burke, CBC News, Beijing.
We'll be talking a lot about all those angles, but let's dive into the numbers underpinning this preliminary deal. What's Canada getting? What is it giving up? Linda Ward is on this story for us this morning. Linda, the Prime Minister is calling this a new era trade with China. What's in the agreement?
Yeah, so basically Canada is cutting the 100% tariffs there on EV vehicles from China lowering canola duties in return, calling this historic, productive 2 days of meetings where they start to really strategically recalibrate this relationship with China. This effort began back in the fall, and at that time, there was a conference in South Korea around the same time that both Canada and China were being hit pretty hard with these U.S. tariffs. Both countries now coming together, closer together, further from the United States. Let's talk about electric vehicles for a minute. In 2024, Canada followed the U.S. in putting those tariffs of 100% on electric vehicles from China. Canada will now allow up to 49,000 Chinese EVs into the Canadian market at a tariff rate of 6.1%. 49,000 is what we allowed in prior to that hike on tariffs. And they expect that this is going to drive up investment in Canada, create new jobs, bolster Canada's electric vehicle supply chain. And in 5 years, they expect that that number will be put up to 70,000. And more than 50% of those vehicles would be under $35,000. So they say these vehicles will become cheaper for Canadian consumers. When we look at canola, China responded to Canada's electric vehicle tariffs by imposing duties on Canadian canola, basically shutting out the Chinese market to Canadian producers. China's exports from Canada fell 10.4% last year. By March 1st, China will lower tariffs on Canadian canola seed from 85% to about 15%. And Canadian canola meal and peas will not be subject to tariffs starting March 1st until at least the end of this year. Together, the government says that this is going to unlock nearly $3 billion in export orders for Canadian businesses. Carney says that they are looking going forward to grow that even further. Here's what he said.
That creates a series of expectations about where we're going from here, whether it's in canola, other grains, pulses, lobster, beef, pork, pet food, all these covered. So there's movement, and there's a real, it's a return, and actually more than a return, to Canada as an important agriculture partner with China.
So cozying up a little bit with China here, but again, growing further away from the United States. They say this was the result of months of engagement to get to this point.
It has been. I mean, there have been subsequent visits prior to this, starting in October with various government officials at the federal and provincial level. I've been scanning the reaction in worldwide media from the Associated Press, from the New York Times, Bloomberg, and many of the headlines say, in a break with the United States. That's not the kind of headline that you want to have these days in some ways, but that's what it is. What are we hearing, or what do we expect from the United States?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be interesting to hear Donald Trump's reaction to this when he reads those headlines. Carney telling reporters Canada's relationship is more predictable than the United States, and he was asked directly how he would explain this to President Trump. Here's what he said.
I think we need to look at this in the context of building. I mean, we're building a new part of our car industry, building cars of the future in partnership, bringing affordable autos for Canadians at a time when affordability is top of mind, and doing it at a scale that allows for a smooth transition in the sector.
So kind of avoiding the question directly there. No doubt there will be concerns from Washington, but also here at home from the auto industry, from the province of Ontario, the Premier. We're expecting to hear some reaction there as well today. But the Prime Minister saying as part of this agreement, in 3 years, they'll have a chance to review its progress and see, did Canada actually get what it wanted out of this deal?
Yeah, and useful to underscore that the EVs suggested is about 3% of Canadians' auto market. And, you know, President Trump is also meeting with President Xi. It's expected 4 times this year. So there is still dialogue between these countries. And this is the start of a parade of other leaders. The Prime Minister of the UK is going to China next week, and then followed by the leadership of Germany. So interesting that this is a parade towards China to develop trade with that country. All right. Thank you, Linda. Lots to talk about. We're going to take a closer look now at what the deal with China means for the fisheries industry. Let's bring in Brett Ruskin from Halifax. Brett, you've been covering this story for us. Since China slapped 25% tariffs on Canadian seafood, lobster, one of the key seafood exports, what does this deal potentially mean for the fishery there?
Well, this is good news, Susan, for the fishery here in Nova Scotia, especially folks who haul in that lobster from the cold Atlantic Ocean, because they've been operating since early last year under this additional 25% tariff for Chinese buyers, to have that Canadian lobster head to Asian markets, head to China. And that's been kind of in competition with the American lobster from the state of Maine. So a slightly better product, a slightly higher quality product here in Canada. But certainly Chinese buyers have been paying a premium on that Canadian lobster as a result of this additional 25% tariff. So with this tariff soon to be gone, that is good news for the folks here on the East Coast who have been dealing with this difficulty to get access to that Chinese market. They've seen about a decrease of around 50%. So of the kind of market, of the interest being cut in half from those Chinese buyers. And so it is a significant change to this relationship between the lobster industry here on the East Coast and that Chinese market, and certainly good news here for that Atlantic fishery. Susan.
All right, Brett, China is a key market for the West Coast fishery too. What will this deal mean for BC?
Oh yeah, taking a look at BC, the West Coast crab fishery, they export about 90% of their crab to Asian markets as well. So they've seen a 60% decrease in the last year or so as a result of these additional 25% tariffs from the Chinese market. And so that's seen a significant drop in the price per pound for crab as well. So that's not good news for business. It hasn't been good news for business, but this is a good news story for those folks on the West Coast as well. Likely happy to hear the news coming out of Beijing over the last couple of hours. So watching closely to see what that's going to mean for lobster exporters here in the East Coast, for crab exporters on the West Coast, once that 25% additional tariff for Chinese buyers comes and is dropped on March 1st. Susan.
Well, thank you for that update, Brett.